Welcome to the Savage GM podcast. I'm your host, Jerry Savage Daddy Gunning. Surprise, bitches, we didn't pod fade. So tonight's episode brought to you by our proud Patreon supporters. Check them out at patreon.com. Join and subscribe as well if you want to get behind us. Throw us a buck. Help us find a better solution than this, I guess. And we're also on social media at SWGM Podcast on Facebook, at SWGM Podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe, share, and join the YouTube channel. And check us out on iTunes. I know that the podcast is currently not listed there. It will be shortly, coming up this Monday. Tonight's topic, free-for-all. So we're going to have a free-for-all conversation. We're just going to discuss general topics and role play, and away we go. So, gentlemen, go ahead. Let's jump in on it, whatever you want to talk about.
Anyone got their Suede package yet?
I have not even got a tracking number yet, but we are now under instruction from Shane not to post about that anymore on the official Facebook page.
Oh, let's have that conversation. Oh. Live in your fascist game designer world where you get to tell us what to talk about on an open platform. Okay.
Like what, furries in space?
Yeah, I mean, fucking.
Fuck you and furries. Don't ever bring up furries in my presence ever again.
No, there's furries in space in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we making a furries in space game now? Because
topical.
No, that's not happening.
I mean, how would you go about doing that? Is it just
We're not
like social conflicts?
See, this is like Star Wars. We're not talking about it. We're just not talking about it.
Okay.
I know it's free for all, but fuck it. I'm going to censor that shit. I'm going to shut that shit down. No, we're not talking about that.
Wait, are Wookiees furries?
Yes, very much so. So are Ewoks, which makes it even weirder.
So I guess we're fucking talking about it. All right, let's talk about fucking furries.
I thought you shut that shit down, but no, it just kept running going.
Art has a question about lazy GM. Yeah, that's all I do for every game is lazy GM style. In fact, there's a book you should buy if you want to do it. It's like $5, and it's called The Lazy Dungeon Master. It's one of the best things you'll ever buy if you want to just be able to prep a game in 5 minutes off of note cards. You cannot fucking go wrong with that book.
That wasn't John Wick, was it?
What the fuck are you talking about?
Like, no, John Wick did Never Unprepared or Playing Dirty.
Oh, that's John Wick.
I don't think John Wick did the lazy GM.
No, John Wick did Playing Dirty.
Yeah.
GM's Guide. What you guys are referring to are the oh god, what is it? Pendant? It's not
by
Pendant.
Mike Shea. He did 2 of them. The new one is
there's 2.
But the first one is fucking baller. It's well worth the money. Yeah, sorry, I thought you were talking about John Wick, the gunfighter. I was like, no, Dustin's done had a fucking stroke.
No, you do know there's a fairly legendary game designer out there known as John Wick.
No, I don't actually.
Yeah, he
probably Google him sometime, Scott.
Please.
No, in regards to the lazy thing though, I really do think this is one of those things that got overplayed. That Savage World was fast, furious fun, so it was for lazy game masters who didn't want to have to do any prep work. I'll be honest, before Savage Worlds, I pretty much played exclusively D&D as the primary game and a lot of other stuff as secondaries. And I could sit down to run a D&D game with no prep. I could just grab the monsters manual, throw stuff at my players as I needed to without having to do this ungodly mathematical prep that people always talked about. Because once you've run any system for any period of time, you will get comfortable enough with it that you can do the lazy no prep type game. It's not as difficult as people seem to think it is.
No.
That's fair.
So I don't know, Art, does that answer Art's question? Next topic.
So we didn't pod fade.
Yeah, we're
That's
back.
I was worried about you guys.
You know, here's all I got to say. So this show is 5 years running.
Yeah.
Weekly, episodic. I think we've missed, not counting what was previously happened, I think we missed a grand total of 4 episodes in a 5-year run. And you're suddenly offline for 2 weeks. Everybody, oh well, they pod faded. They're not coming back.
Well, yeah, because you just left without any words.
To be fair,
No, there was a post to this. There was a post to the Savage Worlds Facebook group.
Your last podcast was like October of last year.
Oh, was it October of last year
on Google Play?
Well, we had found out the podcast itself wasn't going out. That the YouTube one was, but the podcast wasn't going out for like a month and a half. And then on top of it, we've gone, I want to say actually 4 weeks now without a live episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
One while I was at Gen Con, and that's been a minute ago, folks.
Yeah.
And that one apparently never broadcast. We thought we were live, but we weren't.
Damn. So how is Gen Con?
You know, for going to that specific con kind of for the first time, I have to admit I was completely and totally overwhelmed.
Oh wow!
It was so big.
Yeah.
Like I met Jody. I never found where Clint was. He was in a separate space that was set up just to demo furniture, and we never found that location. I never found which hotel it was that was the main hotel where all the Savage Worlds games were being run. So I missed an opportunity to really talk with a lot of Savages. But I talked to several people at the PEG booth. Well, it wasn't the PEG booth. It was actually Carolina Game Tables booth with Jody, and I know like Christopher Landauer was there, and we did a Atomic Ninja interview with them. The first half of that I think is already out. And there's a second half of that coming down the road where we actually talk kind of behind the scenes of Dead End. And I believe we revealed 2 mechanics we've never talked about publicly in that interview. So there's some interesting stuff there. I got to hold, and I physically have a copy of the Bureau 13 or SWAT Jumpstart. I don't remember which one it is, but I have it literally, tucked away. I believe he said there were, like a dozen of them in existence, and I ended up with a physical copy of it. That was kind of cool. Got to meet Mike Pondsmith and shake his hand, which was great because that was legitimately like the first time I fell in love with gaming. Like my first experiences were BattleTech at the tabletop and D&D with some kids who were into it and got me into it. But when I picked up Cyberpunk, I was like, no, this is something I really want to dig my teeth into. And so it was really cool to meet somebody who goes all the way back to the very origin of me, really falling into the hobby.
Yeah, he's a cool dude too, man. He has his shit together. Like his philosophy, not just in game, but his ability to, to see forward, right, in sort of that genre of cyberpunk, along with all the great authors of cyberpunk, is pretty fucking telling. Because a lot of the things, I know that meme was going around Twitter for a while, but he did predict in the 90s all the nonsense and bullshit we're seeing now. It was crazy. So yeah.
Instruction.
The new school attitudes of fans and telling them, no, this is what I created and I'm going to defend my creation. You don't get to twist it into some narrative that you want it to be. This is what I created, and there's a reason I created it that way, because I know people have gotten upset at him for some of the like stereotypes and things like that he put in there that were fairly classic 80s stereotypes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, all the Asian shit and all that jazz. Yeah.
It's very much, he leaned into the idea not of being quote unquote politically correct, but rather showing what an insular little community of like gangbangers is like when they have an ethnic heritage or they're trying to adopt an ethnic heritage that isn't actually theirs.
Yes. Right.
So they lean into stereotypes that don't apply because they're trying to engage that mythos and you know, it's like you see these modern day guys who have the big long bushy beards and a Mjolnir hanging around their neck, who want to talk about being a Viking that have no Nordic blood anywhere in their background.
They just don't get it, right? They're the same people who will like, we'll do events or whatnot, and someone will be like, "Oh, Till Valhalla." And it's like, you know, there's a lot more to the belief structure than wanting to fucking die and, you know, be resurrected and fight every day. Maybe you should do a little bit of fucking research. But yeah, I'm tracking, man. Did he run any games that you saw, or I'm wondering.
Mike himself, I believe, was playing in a couple, but I was not aware of any he ran. If he ran them, they were all off book. And the only thing I actually ended up playing was I played a lot of BattleTech when I was there, because Catalyst had like the biggest booth on the floor and the largest amount of play space in the main building. They had, I want to say they had a full like fifth of the entire showroom floor for gaming that was just them, whether it was the big BattleTech pods or the tables and all their
they have that shit back.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god, that shit was so amazing back in the day.
This is one of those things that I found out while I was there. The guys who run those pods live an hour north of me.
Oh, bro.
And they actually do like a monthly gathering where if you live locally, you show up, and on a Sunday, they just throw them open and you can play all day for free.
You got to get a uniform. You know that, right? You got to start cosplaying this shit.
Dude, I have so much BattleTech stuff in my house. And I just backed the big Kickstarter they did for way more money than I should have. So as far as Savage Worlds, though, I know we had dinner with Carl Kiesler while he was there, and he was running like back-to-back games. Carl ran, I want to say 3 or 4 games where it was booked games. And then I know he was running at least 3 games that were off book, all of which were full a month or 2 before the con.
Wow.
You did a special.
It was hard just to get him for dinner.
You did a guest spot with Landauer too, didn't you, Dave? Yeah, the Savage Cast.
Talk more Gen Con and Atomic Ninja. The second half of that, where we talk specifically Dead End, is yet to come out. Last time I talked to the Chris's, it's going to hit my email box for final approval from Atomic Ninja in case I said anything I shouldn't have before it goes out to the fans. But I think that should be out before too much.
Nice. Fuck. Jared didn't go to Gen Con. He's like me.
Nope, didn't go to Gen Con.
Well, I'm thinking about going back to Mace this year. I told my wife, I was like, that's only 9 hours away from Memphis. I could drive that and not be a little bitch about it and just deal with it. I don't know. Mace is fun. There's a lot of savagery there, but I don't know.
Maybe I had actually planned to do the Savage Cruise, but we ran into a couple of financial snags.
Yeah, sure.
And she had a health issue come up that we're having to deal with, and that kind of put us in a spot where we're gonna have to skip it, and hopefully it goes off well enough that there's a Savage Cruise next year, and we'll try to catch that one.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not too far away, Scott. I think I'm actually within driving distance of Mace, man.
Oh yeah, you're right there. Because when I lived in Maryland.
Yeah, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Con on the Cob, and it's somewhere in I want to say Southern Ohio.
Yeah, it's a little farther of a drive for me. It's like 12 hours away or some shit. But yeah, man. I don't know. What else, Jared? You've been gone?
So Savage Worlds convention gaming, since we're on the topic of conventions.
Okay, sure.
Let's talk a little bit about convention gaming.
All right.
One shots?
Yeah, of course, right? Although you could rig up where I've seen it done, right? And Dave may have seen this too. And anyone else, like where you can put your time slots and say like, hey, this is part 1, part 2, part 3, and try to get the same players. But that seems like a risky gambit because you always have new blood in there and shit.
So Chris did one where they were running, I want to say this was either at Genghis or Tacticon, where they were running every year was another episode of the game. So, and you kind of had like you didn't get a guaranteed spot, but if you ran the previous year, it was the same character. Otherwise, you'd just have a different character to play. And it was just the game continues year after year. And he would run basically that one adventure, but for anybody who wanted to play this year's adventure, and then next year he's only going to play the new adventure. He doesn't play the old one anymore. I know they did that, and it was ETU based, where you were basically playing like one episode per school.
Oh, wow. Holy shit. Damn, that's long drawn out. Yeah, I don't know. Normally if I do Savage Worlds, well, any game I do at a con, it's filled with fucking props, pre-gens, and it's just the table is decorated. And you got to go to the 9s, I think, because you really want eyes on you. John, Steve has seen how I run shit and all basically the clusterfuck of props and tokens and amulets and knives and weird shit that I throw on the table for the party to hold, a set of lock picks for the rogue to have in their hands, things like that,
So honestly, I'll say this. I think that's the better route than what I see the most often, which is people who bring a big freaking rolling tote of terrain cycle up onto the table. Because the props, like if I hand you guys a dull dagger and say, this is the dagger you found in the room, and then here's an actual map with burned edges and it's parchment, like those tactile things you can pick up and manipulate will have so much more resonance with all the players than a map that I can build in front of you out of little styrofoam pieces.
Right. Yeah. Put your dolls down. Yeah. I don't get it, man. But yeah, I always thought, it's the Call of Cthulhu GM in me, right? I'll never break that. Hell, I've got a local group here in Memphis now. I'm running them through D&D, and I run D&D like I run Dungeon World and Savage World, and they're responsive to it in a positive way. But yeah, it's all props. I'm handling shit and making shit out of clay and painting things and, making it as scary as possible. But yeah, on the convention side, yeah, it's always the route I go. I don't know. I've never had a bad moment at a con with Savage World. I did have there were a couple of, I don't know, like jock bros. They were those alpha gamer types. They're kind of like me, where you wouldn't suspect them of being a fucking nerd until you start talking to them and you realize you're playing Dungeons and Dragons next to them. And we had an older lady in the game, and it was her first time playing. And this was, I don't know when this was, a few years ago. And the one guy was just doing the usual, that jocular, nonsensical fucking shit would come out of his mouth. And that's when I finally had to lean in on him, to decide to be like, hey, I need you to cut the shit, or leave the table. It was like, come on, bro.
Well, we got to have a live comment, so I kind of want to address this one. So John Steve writes that he's riding out the storm in North Carolina. Wants to know, have you ever run or played in a game where the weather played a major factor?
Well, funny you should ask. I mean, have I personally? I think I've only run 2 games where the weather was kind of a central theme, and they were one-shots where basically the characters were trying to escape from some weather events that were happening. So it was this constant theme that was there in the background. One was a big storm. I don't remember if I was running it as like a thunderstorm with tornadoes, or if it was a hurricane that was blowing through and had also tornadoes. But the players were dodging tornadoes and things like that were occurring, and they were having to seek shelter in different places. So I've done that once. The other one I did that type of a thing was predominantly set in like a blizzard winter setting. So that every time the characters went out, they're facing exposure, they're facing those things. And then there was a small area that was also radiation heavy. So they had not just one, but 2 separate weather type environmental hazards that they had to deal with to survive the session. It was interesting to run. I don't know how fun it was for the players to engage with that, mostly because I find a lot of players see that as, how do I put this?
A dick move?
Not a dick move, but like they hate it when you enforce all the rules for weather, because then they have to do things they don't want to do, like worry about whether or not their character is wearing a hazmat suit, worry about whether or not they've got cold weather gear, having to make those vigor checks against the cold and things like that. Like, players get a little miffed when they're having to make constant dice rolls to avoid fatigue. And I think that was the problem they were having, is that it wasn't that the story wasn't engaging. It was that the mechanic feels overly punishing when they're used to just no penalties, run, fight.
Too much verisimilitude, maybe, and the survivability of the setting. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's entire settings that have the environment, right? So, like Hellfrost is an example.
Yeah.
Winter Eternal, which is essentially Hellfrost.
Ooh.
I mean, when you break it down.
Damn, dick move.
It's kind of its own thing, a little bit, but it's really heavily inspired by Hellfrost, if you ask me.
Yeah, sure.
I would say, like, I'm not sure what was the Arabian Desert one that follows Hellfrost. Yeah, Burning Sands.
Burning Sands.
I think if you do it right, Day After Ragnarok is an environmental clusterfuck. If you do it right?
Yeah.
Day After Ragnarok? Yeah.
Day After Ragnarok could be. I mean, I've run I started a lot of campaigns where weather plays a super important effect for the players. You know, it's sort of, you can push them on and not so much of a railroad, but like, hey, you motherfuckers have 3 choices and the weather's going to continue to beat against you and try to murder you. So we need to start making some faster decisions and get on with it. You start like, hey, if you can stay and fight and rescue, you know, NPC X to see if they have any valuable information, but I need you to know that's going to also begin to damage you because the weather is going to be implementing. You're going to lose rations and shit like that. And like Dave says, so what I started doing now for like the last couple of years with rations and ammo and torches or any shit like that, I just give them little cards that have essentially it's little pictures of like, you know, a fucking medieval picnicky food thing and have 3 boxes on there. And so when something happens, like you roll a survival check and fail, right, you check a box off. And so every failure, you're dwindling your resources until you can refill it. If you rest overnight or camp, you check a box off. And that's how it's an easier way of tracking, like, hey, you're going to have everything you need until there's a certain point where the criticality of the roll depends on how much shit you have left to move you onward. So it's very simple and straightforward and fast.
I think probably what I feel is one of the most overlooked things is everybody seems to focus on the hazardous environmental issue, like, well, it's incredibly cold or it's incredibly hot. I don't think the ancillary things that go along with that are accounted for. Now it's rough terrain because you're having to wade through 6 feet of snow.
Right.
Yeah.
On top of that, now it's difficult terrain. Now it's do you sleep at night?
Right. Yeah.
Ice on the
survival
ground.
rolls. Yeah, ice on the ground, slippery slopes.
Sure. Things
are slippery. I think it's not so much the make a vigor check against cold that's the issue. It's that I don't think it becomes a pile on.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it right, if you do it somewhat accurately, then yeah, I can see where it becomes a drag for the player. Like, oh my god, really? I got to make another roll?
Right. Yeah.
Reduce vision.
I think the obvious solution for that is only call for that roll when it's appropriate. You know, just like we were just talking about with the food thing. You know, Scott has kind of set this up to be this abstract mechanic where when you make that roll, you're ticking off a box. When too many are ticked off, then it matters. But until then, it really doesn't.
Right.
You know, that's great, but I'm betting you're not making them make that dice roll every hour.
No. It's only when it's important or would be pertinent, right? Yeah, like there's a no shit survival roll that needs to be done because you need to like find a fucking trail. So this is D&D terms, right? Because like I said, I'm running D&D now more than anything else. But if you're making those rolls and it comes to the point of like, hey, this really fucking matters and you can get off trail or you can get off track or you're not finding the food and you're going to burn through resources, then yeah, it's not all the time though. Yeah, no. because that you're right. That would be just detritus to a fucking game.
I'm more of a fan of the hazardous terrain not being the form of weather.
Yeah.
But like now, let's see, you're gonna have to hike up this hill, and oh look, you can either swim across this gorge. Oh, you didn't take swimming as a skill,
right?
All right, well, you can try it unskilled.
It's a dump.
Well, but you can try it unskilled. Well, if you're talking about athletics.
Yeah, now it's athletics, and you start at a D4.
Well, to be technical, actually, the rules say that I can call for a swimming or climbing roll, even if they have athletics, if it's more specific.
Yeah, I don't understand why they did that, because obviously in the real world, not everyone knows how to fucking swim. So I don't know.
Or fine, give me your athletics roll. What about all your gear? He's swimming it. He's climbing in the drink with all that backpack and all that armor and all those weapons. All right, give it to me in a -4, because damn. Or I'm more a fan of the environment forcing Sophie's choices and hard decisions. Like, do you try to swim across it and risk losing your gear or drowning, or do you take the extra day or hours it takes to go around that obstacle?
Well, I mean, one thing you can always do is you can apply force coming at them. You have to consider that if there's something on the peripheral that's forcing you, I mean, it's not just a matter of something that's pulling you across like the quest. There can be something coming up behind you that makes you have to choose between standing and fighting and retreating across the river.
So I think there's an aspect of this that is left out probably the most often, and that is, if there's a hostile environment, there's also a supply and demand issue that should come up in the game. So let's assume you're running a post-apocalyptic game, and you've got a character who has batteries or food or bullets, something that there's not going to be any more of ever made. So you have this precious resource. People are going to want to take that from you.
Well, how dare you?
And now you're going to have this thing where if the players are being flashy about having the thing that deals with that hostile environment, that's going to draw attention and should lean not necessarily to mechanical fallout, but it should lead to narrative fallout. You should have to suddenly deal with somebody who wants that hazmat suit, who wants that pack of batteries, who wants that, magazine of extra ammunition, and is willing to go to, extreme lengths to take it from you.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't always have to be a physical confrontation. That could be the person playing up to you. Hey, I'm an injured. I have a broken wing. I need help. But when you're not looking, just taking your shit and leaving. It doesn't have to be a guns out, give me your shit kind of situation.
The effective way to do that is just a simple con. The person who rolls up lies to the party, gets taken in as an allied extra, and then disappears in the middle of the night with half your shit.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people don't think about shit. Like, so my wife, she's just like, every once in a while, she's like, you're really disturbed. But it was a, sorry, it was a commercial for a company who sells Jennies, right? Generators for your home. And I was like, hey, that's pretty awesome. You get all your fucking lights and shit running, your power's running. And guess what I do with my fucking long gun in the ultimate danger? Now I know where to come because I know who has fucking power, food, water sources, and all that shit. I mean, you're broadcasting to the world. And she's just like, that's fairly dark. I was like, yeah, but I'm not wrong.
Well, it's one of the first things they teach you in any kind of a survival course is if you are in an area where you might have something or there's a reason why someone will mean to do you harm, light is your worst enemy.
Oh, fucking fat.
You do not want to skyline yourself. You do not want to build that big campfire or carry that torch because it gives away where you are. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's something that you never see happen in a game at the tabletop, though it should, is the players who are tromping through the dungeon carrying a torch should absolutely stumble into multiple ambushes that have been set by the, dark vision monsters off in the corners who've seen them coming for the last half hour.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's also I'm a big fan of the comedian Bill Burr, and he has this bit about wanting to buy a gun, and he's saying that he lives in Los Angeles. There's technically no water supply. He's concerned about defending himself when the zombies come. So he's asking so he's going to start researching. Everybody says plant some zucchini, build a garden, get a windmill. He goes, and that's all fine and good. He goes, but unless you can defend that shit, you're pretty much collecting resources for the next biggest guy in the neighborhood.
Yep.
Just to come take your shit.
Yep.
And I agree. I think that's something that's left out of gaming. Do you think it's a thing where the GM doesn't occur to the GM?
Yeah.
Or the GM doesn't want to be a dick? Or is afraid to put that into the game and everybody go, oh, dude, you suck.
It's not the fantasy that the players came to engage with.
Yeah.
And I think so. Let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's something that again gets missed a lot. Is all of us that when we go to sit down and play, we're not actually looking for a faithful recreation of medieval Europe. What we're looking for is a faithful recreation of our favorite Lord of the Rings or King Arthur story. We're not looking for what happens when mankind straps himself to a rocket and tries to make it to Mars. Right. We're trying to capture, the last Pitch Black film. We're not looking for certain things at the table. We might say we are, we might think we are, but at the end of the day, we're really not. What we're looking for is these fantasy mythology type things, and you have to lean into the fantasy your players expect. Sometimes your players are going to expect horrible, nasty things to happen to them on the regular. I speak from experience, watching a group become more and more enthralled by what's the worst thing that could happen this week in our dead end playtest, because that group has leaned deep into the fantasy of that world, that it's not if your character is going to die, it's how long until your character dies.
And how horribly.
How much can you suffer before that happens? How much can you get away with in the end of the world? And because the players know that's the theme, they lean into it. They make player choices that absolutely lead to their character's death.
Nice.
At the same time, take that same exact group of players and drop them down in like a Starship Troopers game where they're all, glitted out to the gills with cyberpunk level gear with machine guns and machine gun blades as bayonets and stuff. And these guys will, one-handed choke a raptor and throw it off of a bridge. Again, I've seen that happen in one of these games. Sure. So, you have to lean into the fantasy of the game you're playing.
That's true.
Genre specific, anyone?
What do you mean?
Well, like Dave said, you have to lean into the fantasy that you're playing. Like, you have certain genres that you have to go along with, but then there's also subgenres like dark fantasy and high fantasy, completely different, even though they have a lot of the same trappings,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, but I think what Dave's talking about is the overarching tropes of the type of game you're playing, right?
Well,
I mean, if you're playing an Indiana Jones recreation, then yeah, people don't die.
Well,
most of the violence is fisticuffs, not.
Well, there was that one guy that got a little too close to the propeller. And then the one guy that got a little too close to the anthill.
or the people that melted when the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to.
But all bad guys. Once again, all bad guys.
Oh,
none
right.
Of the good guys.
They're not people. I got you.
Right.
They opened the Ark events.
Oh, shit. Now we're going to have that conversation. The instances aren't people. No, I think one of the things I'm talking about is it's not genre specific. It's not along those lines as much as it's something where if your players showed up and what they're expecting is different from what you're running, they can adjust and you can adjust to find a middle ground. But once you've found it, you have to stay true to it. So if your middle ground is, Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass,
Right.
and when someone walks over and picks up the teapot, tips it over, and outpours cake, they're not shocked that the absurd happened because you set the tone that you're through the looking glass where the absurd can happen.
Yeah, true.
But what they don't expect is to outpour acid that then burns them. Because then it's not just absurd, but you've gone against kind of the frivolous nature of the world you've set them up in, and now you've made the world too dark for what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, we're just talking about consistency of tone at the end of the day, right? We're talking about consistency of tone and theme. And a lot of that is you have to take the temperature of the table too, right? I mean, you have to be aware of that as a GM.
So, and as much as consistency of tone matters, it's not really what I'm talking about. Because you can change the tone halfway through the game. Like, you could have the high fantasy game that suddenly turns into a dark fantasy Cthulhuian tale. Your elves and dwarves and paladins, and you're, exploring this ancient ruin running a bog standard high fantasy dungeon crawl until you crack open the sarcophagus at the bottom and out crawls a entity beyond imagination.
Right.
And releases a secret that man should not know. You can make that change because, again, it's fantasy. But what you can't really have happen in that situation is to go from you're playing bog standard high fantasy to you crack open this casket and people automatically die. Because that violates the high fantasy mythology that the players that are playing in. They're going to expect a death save. They're going to expect a resistance roll. They're going to expect some form of magical defense or warning. They're going to expect the ability to interact with that rather than just dying because they released Cthulhu from his eternal prison.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're playing a Cthulhu game, start to finish, you've set a kind of a set of mythology that, no, a gun is going to kill your character. Do not get shot. Do not get into a gunfight. So then when you crack the urn and out comes Yogg-Saron, he melts your mind and your character's dead. You don't question it when the Cthulhu game has you encounter a Cthulhuian monster and the character just dies.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
A great example of a mechanic that does that in Savage Worlds is the Realms of Cthulhu gritty damage.
Yeah.
Like, that sets a tone right up front. It doesn't matter whether you're in combat with a Cthulhu monster or you're in combat with a fellow player character or an NPC. You can't soak wounds, and you make an immediate vigor check to see if you're incapacitated, regardless of the number of wounds you suffered.
Yeah.
Just, you took damage. Give me a vigor check to see if it knocks you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Anything in the chat? Players expect crit roll and you run with them writing the story. Oh, yeah, that's the one. I listen to crit roll and I enjoy it, but that is the one thing I will say that I hear a lot of folks do is a lot of GMs, auditory wise, will tell the players, all right, here's what happens, right? Like everything. Here's what the monster does. Your character rolls a successful strike and your sword goes into the monster, and just, I always scream like, fucking stop, bro. Fucking ask them, what does it look like when they hit the monster? What does it look like when they barely miss the monster? Shit like that. But yeah, he's right. I'm working on that now. I got one player out of the 4 who he's young, he's brand new to gaming, but man, like the book is his fucking Bible, and I'm fucking him up by telling him, look, I'm going to run rules as written as a core concept, but we're going to do fun shit. Like, I'm going to allow you to make a fucking athletics check to run up the wall, spring off the fucking cleric's back to then attack the monster. If you succeed on the athletics check, I'll give you advantage to the fucking attack roll. Right? And he's just like, well, that's 2 actions. I'm like, dude, Shut the fuck up.
Well, I think this is worth talking about too, right? So letting players narrate what their characters succeed at and fail at,
Yeah,
is a great way to go as a GM and start to adopt it, because you never know what your player is going to do. And I'll say this, and we were talking about Dead End earlier. In our last week's session, I'm playing an elderly kind of high school football coach. We're in a bar, and the GM goes, "Hey, make a notice roll to see the zombie getting up off the ground that you thought was dead and not moving."
Yeah,
and I failed it, and the GM started to narrate what it was, and I went, "Oh, on top of that, the coach goes and sits down in the chair closest to the zombie on the ground that's getting up with his back to it." Because that should be the result of critically failing to notice that zombie. In my mind, at least, that should be what a critical failure means.
Yeah.
So I think you're doing yourself a disservice as a GM if you start deciding and narrating what the critical failure is without getting input from the player character.
Yeah, absolutely.
About what it is, because it's getting input from your players is going to take it in new and interesting directions that you may not be thinking of as a GM.
Right.
And I don't think any GM would go, "Yeah, well, this is what happens," because it seems like such a dick thing to do and narrate that a player's character does that. But if the player steps into that clusterfuck minefield on their own,
right,
that's guilt-free.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like free-range chicken versus farm range.
And we've always said, let the players dictate their fucking failures, because the players are going to be far harder on themselves than you ever will be. It's just natural. They want that excitement of like, oh, well, I dropped my sword down the shark's dick hole. What happens next?
So I think
Dicklodon.
Dick wall.
Oh no! #Cocklodon.
You laugh, but based off of some of the things I've seen, like
go to DeviantArt.
Yeah, gosh. Like the furry seems safe compared to
God damn it. I want to talk about furries. Jesus.
I blame you. If you allowed this to run past Scott's comment.
No. Hey, we can really get into furry comments. I had a procedure.
Well, I can't talk about Star Wars. I have to scratch my itch somehow.
No, I think that the interesting aspect with that is players think they want what they get from a novel when they sit down to the table. And they don't really realize that that's not what they're looking for until you ask them to narrate their success or their failure.
Yeah.
As soon as you turn that spotlight on them so that they have the freedom to be freaking Drizzt Do'Urden, you rolled the critical success, explain to us all what that looks like. Instead of being able to do that, they freeze up. And they realize that that's not really what they want. What they want is to sit down, roll some dice, and have you tell them a story about them hitting monsters. And they don't even really want you to talk about like the angle of attack and things like that, because at the end of the day, what we do does not simulate combat at all.
Yeah.
Real combat is over typically in about 3 exchanges. Like you get 2 people who really know how to fight, and sooner or later, one of them just spots the weakness in the other one's defenses, and the fight is over. And there will be a weakness in one of their defenses because motherfuckers get tired when you're wearing armor and swinging swords at each other.
It's all about endurance training. You gotta. A lot of people don't understand how you train to that. When you're carrying 60 pounds of kit and you got to keep moving forward at a not walking pace. And it's training. It's a lot of training, a lot of cardio, a lot of knowing yourself. It's
a lot of grit, just pushing past it, pushing through walls.
Are you gonna quit? Because if you're gonna quit, then I don't need you on my fucking ruck, because you're gonna quit on everyone around you and you're gonna leave someone to die. Right? Yeah. That's how you got to think about shit. And if you incorporate it in the games, I don't know, difference.
Well, I mean, stop and think about just the little stuff in combat that we never hear even referenced in the rules. Things like, okay, you've arrived at the combat and you drop your main back.
Right? Yeah.
You know, there was a video game that just came out not that long ago. It was a low fantasy adventure game, and there was a bonus to everything you did in combat if you hit a button on the controller to cut your backpack free at the start of combat.
Yep.
And then it would literally lay there in the world till you came back and picked it back up and put it back on. But your character moved faster, didn't consume as much stamina every time they swung their sword or dodged out of the way, because you were suddenly carrying a third of the weight you were moving with previously.
Yeah.
And that is such an easy thing we could bring to the table, but no one really wants to. You know, you up the last time your players wanted to track encumbrance.
No one wants to do that because it's fucking hot garbage. But so if you want to do that, all you gotta really do is look at the fucking character sheets every once in a while, like after each session, and be like, hey, fuckface, why do you got 9 swords of fucking monster fucking on here? You better drop that shit to 2. You know, because that's really where it comes into play, is the characters who are like, oh, I'm just gonna carry all the shits in the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you get the guy with the bags of holding, and inside is 9 years worth of treasure.
Yeah, I got bag of holding.
All right, let's see if there's anything else in the chat, or if there's anything else we want to talk about. I mean, we're not just limited to.
Oh no, it's good to see you guys
going on in the chat.
Yeah,
I missed your faces.
Rash Tiger is like, why in the world would a player argue with the DM when the DM is letting them do something cool or weird?
Hey man,
they exist. They exist.
I mean, I have it happen in nearly every group. I've had at least one player who's going to argue with me when I let them do something the rules don't allow for.
Yeah, absolutely.
They will argue the point.
Yep.
I like literally, and I think it goes back to. I've mentioned this before. I ran a game that was full of people who like to play Pathfinder, and I would give them options, and they'd get mad at me because I'm the GM or the DM, and I'm supposed to create the world, and I'm like, I'm giving you options.
Yeah, man.
Like, they just get overloaded by it. I'm like, that's why I like to play Savage Worlds, is I can say and do something completely batshit crazy, and the GM is like, okay, give me a roll, -2, -4, we're good.
Yep.
Here's what cracks me up is like we tout about our hobby a lot, like it's cooperative, man. It's cooperative storytelling, man. But really, the way people show up and play at the table, it's a spectator sport.
For some of it, yeah, there's quite a bit that goes on. You got to really eke that out of players.
Yeah.
You know.
What do I see? I don't know, motherfucker. What do you see?
Yeah. It happens, right? If you get really like, I got a local group, and I tapped out because I was like, if I want a game, basically a junkie, right? When you're gaming, and it's like I'd rather game D&D than not game at all.
Uh-huh.
And fucking like magic, I got 3 really solid players, and like, holy fuck, this is amazing. You know, here we go. I got people who are willing to work with me on shit like that. I'm like, hey, here's what we're gonna do. You know, like our one big set. I mean, they had a TPK. Like our first little adventure ended up with a full TPK that took a couple of hours for them to get through on a boss battle in a lair. But they realized, like, oh, you don't pull punches and shit. I was like, no, I'll murder your character. I don't give a fuck. But they were so into it, and they were helping each other out, and they were learning terrain, and they learned how to do different shit. And so it's just eking them out. When I told them, like, hey, your paladin didn't charge the big bad guy. Your fucking paladin stood there and tried to fight a bunch of fucking skeletons. You know, that's not what your role is. You need to know your role in the game, because I'm going to play against your roles, and we're going to role play out, and words matter when I say something to you guys. And they're learning that slowly. I'll send them texts and clips and shit, and like, here's some clues that you guys have had, and just make sure you're tracking on this. And then they'll text back. They're like, fuck, I fucking knew you said that, and now we're fucked. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, that's how it is. Now we'll just deal with ramifications of you not paying attention. But all it is, you can train people to game in a better level.
Yeah. One of the things that still to this day amazes me, because Dave and I both do a lot of theater of the mind. And we do it when we were doing it a lot. When I was doing a lot with Roll20, I would find a representative image of like, here's the mechanics garage. And I would make it a point to go, this is not the scene. So if you don't see something in this picture, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist here.
Yes,
This is a representation of a standard mechanic shop, just as a visual point of reference to help you fix your mind in the scene. Over and over again. Is there a hammer in there?
Yeah.
Dude, stop asking me what's in it. Just narrate what you do. And if it makes sense, you're doing it. If it doesn't, I'll stop you. But, like all the time, like I had one player go, so I pick up the impact wrench that they use to take wheels off.
Okay.
It was like waiting for me to go no. And I'm like, and? Oh, it's there? I'm like, dude, you just said it was there. Go. What? It just amazes me that, people can't make that leap of the GM didn't tell me there was a hammer on the carpenter's bench, so there's not a hammer on the carpenter's bench, or I have to ask permission.
Without giving anything away, I do want to point out, even if you have a mechanic that specifically lets the player roll dice and then tell you what is in the world, they still don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can mechanically reinforce a player's ability to add something to the game world, they still won't do it.
Well, a lot. Some people feel like they're cheating, right? Because they're like, well, it can't just be there, and then you'll get that argument too. Yeah, it is odd. I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from D&D gaming in general being more of a board game than anything else in all reality, and everyone treats it like that. So I just don't know.
I think you're right. You're right, Scott, because it did start out as a war game.
Yeah.
And beyond that, like everybody's used to playing a board game like Monopoly. And everybody's used to breaking out the rule books and having like 2 hours arguing over it. But like with a tabletop game, it's like you have to treat it like improv. Pick it up and go, Like you can't noodle it.
Right. What boggles my mind are the people who are on the converse of this dialogue who absolutely think what we're saying is fucking retarded and heretical and makes zero sense, that the GM controls everything. The GM tells you everything. You don't get to narrate what's in the world because that doesn't make it. And those people exist, man. They are out there. I know quite a few of them. I
was going to say, there's a lot of different gamers who have their own style. Yeah. I just started a new group that's playing in the BattleTech universe, and we're playing their version of roleplay. I believe it's NetWarrior Second Edition is the one that they're running. And in that group, I can already see subsets. Like you get the guy who's an ultra terrain needs to be used, so he can get the minutia of moving his little mini around to the table. Which, to be fair, in a role playing game, based on a still alive and thriving tabletop war game, makes sense that's the type of player that's going to draw. You've got another couple of guys who are really into the fine minutia min-max. You're like, oh, but if I take this piece of equipment with this skill, I get this extra ability. And you're like, we've got a couple of those in the group. We've got a couple of like diehard role players, myself included, who are, here's the basic outline of who my character is, but I want to leave myself room to explore the character during play, who talk in a funny voice and have, we're the first ones to have names on their character sheets. And then we've got one guy who's kind of in the middle going, well, I want a little bit of that and I want a little bit of this, and I also want to do some of this role play stuff. So you get different types of gamers. And what I have always found is so long as you give them enough of what they're looking for, it really doesn't matter how mixed your group is, unless you get the guys Scott's talking about.
Yeah.
Who is dyed in the wool. The GM controls everything. I am here to roll dice and be told what happens because I rolled those dice.
Right, yeah.
And that player will become a headache for everyone else at the table, because when they try to narrate what their character does, he'll say, you don't get to do that. They'll try to walk all over other players' interactions, or they'll try to dictate the mechanically specific thing the other player needs to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's I just don't understand it. It really is frustrating. And art, to add into that is the players who don't want to take away other player agencies. So I conquer that with I use the list of the Dungeon World bonds, right? For any game I'm playing, and I cut them out, turn them upside down, and I tell everyone, hey, you pick one bond per player at the table. And then we turn them over and I say, now you're going to resolve these and you guys are going to have a fucking conversation with each other about, like the one dude is, hey, my character cast something of your characters into the fire and I had a vision about you. And that forces a conversation. So it's not agency, but you're getting them used to rubbing those edges of where like, well, I'm going to dictate something about your character. Not you can't be a cunt about it, but I'm going to dictate something. You do get a chance to say yay or nay or alter the deal a little bit, right? And that really helps start those bonds at the table. And man, when you get going in sessions, they fly off the handle at each other in a positive way.
If you can get any group of players to feel free to do this, it will actually build on itself.
Yep.
One of the stories that gets told probably the most often in our Friday night group is something I did on a whim one night when I failed a dice roll. I narrated something that had happened about that dice roll. I narrated that this player character killed an NPC when what we found really was just two dead bodies. What we found is the player character's dead body and the NPC allied extra that had gone off with them's dead body. And we found one with a knife jammed in their head. Well, okay, the obvious answer here is someone jabbed the knife in the head. It was the player character. Everyone at the table knew this is not what happened. We were all there at the table when the two characters died half hour earlier. But that failed dice roll and my character's narration freed up the whole rest of the group to start telling these little micro stories about things that had happened either with an NPC or off to the side when no one else was involved that ended up tying into each other's characters to the point it became this web of not lies, but misunderstandings that were all happening in role play in real time, the way it would actually happen if you had a group of people wandering through the woods together.
Yeah.
Like a game of telephone.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Like it keeps mutating with every retelling a little bit.
Right.
And then it suddenly becomes this urban legend about how this character lured somebody's mother out to the woods just to kill her. Like, oh, I knew that guy wasn't right.
We should call that the John Stamos effect, because every time I hear the John Stamos story about Dead End, it's bigger. It's wider. It's more terrifying. The character is far more, June
ominous,
middle of the zombie apocalypse. Like that character, that little story gets a little embellished every time.
Yeah.
Good shit though, man.
All right, so I think we'll kind of just wrap it up here. We're a little bit past-ish. We started a little bit past-ish, so it's been about an hour-ish. So if we don't have anything else in the live chat, real quick, anything that is incredibly critical and overlooked, we'll go ahead and shut it down. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dave, Scott, and Dustin saying keep rolling.